There are not many tanks with multiple cannons, but there are even less tanks with completely different and independent turrets. This tank has two turrets that are almost equally useful. Each of them offers their own advantages and uses different sets of ammunition types, which gives you some flexibility in how you can approach the battle. In this video I will review not only unique, but also one of the first heavy tanks in a Soviet tech tree, Premium SMK. Tanks with two turrets have a couple of main advantages. First of all, you can fire one more time before going on reload. When one of the rounds fails to hit, penetrate or one-shot the opponent, you can fire the second cannon immediately, before the opponent had time to react and shoot back. The second advantage is that most of the time tanks with multiple cannons remain dangerous. If one of the barrels gets destroyed or the gunner is knocked out, you don't become vulnerable. It's very unlikely that both of the cannons will be damaged at once. Most of the time, after being hit, I was still able to fight back with at least one of the turrets still operational. Additionally, you can load each cannon with different shell types for different kinds of enemies. For example, the main 76mm cannon can fire armor-piercing, shrapnel, high explosive, and of course famous Soviet APHE. The 45mm cannon can also fire 4 types of rounds, just instead of shrapnel it has APCR. Ironically, the smallest cannon has the most penetrating round. You can combine these rounds any way you like, using their strengths and weaknesses, but if you have played War Thunder for a while, you already know that if the cannon can fire APHE, you want to mainly use APHE. The performance of these rounds is so good that every other type of ammunition must be questioning the purpose of their existence. So unsurprisingly, just like you can see in these video clips, most of my kills were done using APHE rounds. Just like for the vast majority of low-rank heavy tanks in the game, penetration will be the biggest issue stopping you from wiping out the enemy team. Especially when up-tiered, when penetrating becomes the biggest challenge, because even medium tanks can resist your shots. Since the secondary turret fires less penetrating APHE rounds, when fighting more armored opponents it makes sense to switch to APCR. While they don't have so much one-shot potential, they are at least able to penetrate enemies. Additionally, the smaller cannon can be reloaded in just 3 seconds, which is more than twice faster than the main gun. So even if APCR projectiles don't do a lot of post-penetration damage, you can make plenty of less damaging shots in a very short amount of time. Having two different cannons has one downside. Instead of getting used to the ballistics of one cannon, with SMK I always felt uncertainty when engaging enemies at long range, since I had to either commit to using one of the guns, or I had to keep adjusting the sights after every shot, messing up the aim every time. On a good note, since tanks' rounds have bad penetration and it becomes even worse at long ranges, there is no point to engage distant targets in the first place, which automatically solves the problem with complicated ballistics. See what I did here? I explained why poor penetration is a good thing. This is how you properly advertise SMK. Since SMK is a heavy tank, you would expect it to have a good armor. And it has a good armor, definitely better than medium tanks have, and I was able to resist many rounds. But this vehicle is not as armored as any other heavy tank of similar battle rating. The thickest frontal plate is 75mm, while the rest of the vehicle is made of 60mm plates. Such armor can help against weaker guns when the distance is big or when hit at an angle, but pretty much every enemy vehicle of similar battle rating will be able to penetrate this tank with a well-placed shot. On a good note, one penetration for SMK is not a big deal. It's quite a big vehicle with 7 crew members, which is a lot. Furthermore, both groups of crew are located separately, so it's unlikely that getting hit once will disable the vehicle completely. In most cases, at least one of the gunners survived, and I was able to show the attacker why shooting at me was a bad idea. But it doesn't matter how many crew members the tank has when your rounds detonate before you shoot them. 2 cannons means that there are 2 separate ammunition racks, and at the moment of release of this video, as long as you have at least 1 spare round for each cannon, both of these massive hitboxes will be present. Taking a small amount of ammunition into battle will not make this vehicle safer. So despite the big crew, there is always a risk that any moment turret rotation, or in this case turrets rotations, are quite slow, up to 15 degrees per second, which is normal for heavy tanks. One of them obviously cannot rotate 360 degrees, but it can point anywhere in front of the tank and even slightly backwards, so horizontal guidance limitations almost never became an issue. The gun's depression is -7 degrees, which could be better, but it's acceptable, especially in Soviet territory that is known to have less cannons depression on average. As you would expect from a heavy tank, especially big as this one, mobility is not its strong side. Nevertheless, it's not that bad either. The maximum speed is 35 kph, which is normal for heavy tanks, but the acceleration is surprisingly good. It allows you to reach max speed no matter the terrain type, so you should be able to move at max speed most of the time. Making turns can also be complicated, but as long as the tank has some momentum, it shouldn't become a big issue. The only really bad thing is the reverse, which is terrible, only 4 kph. Not as terrible as backwards facing machine gun, but still terrible. SMK in arcade feels better, because it becomes faster, more mobile, and slow turrets rotation slightly improves and is not so annoying anymore. Offensive capabilities also increase, since you can see ballistics and penetration indicator, which helps to quickly find a weak spot on enemy's armor. It partially solves the poor penetration issue. The problem is that you only see the indicator for one of the cannons. Another one is invisible unless you choose to control each turret separately, but trust me, you don't want to go down the War Thunder controls rabbit hole. Defensive capabilities are decreased. Opponents will see where you are on a minimap and can use arcade penetration indicator against you, so tanks' armor in this game mode becomes less useful. All in all, I think SMK performance in arcade remains more or less at the same level, but combat becomes faster. SMK is extremely sensitive to being up-tiered or down-tiered. The opponent's armor thickness determines how effective this tank will be. If you can't penetrate your targets, 2 cannons loaded with APH rounds will obliterate everyone in your way. Though in most matches you will have to aim for weak spots or even use APCR shells, which is not as fun as one-shotting everyone. Additionally, frequent armor rack detonations significantly decreased the lifespan of this tank, despite in theory it could absorb more hits because of the large crew. I would rate this vehicle 7 machine guns at the back out of 10. SMK is always a lottery. It can be very fun in those matches where you meet mostly light vehicles, but struggle in those where you mainly face more armored opponents.